I'm
Morning.
gonna play a video as people are coming into the room. Um, and then when this video is over, we're gonna get started. So this is just for all you early birds. Welcome. Thank you for being on time. Really appreciate you.
Here's a conundrum. Identical twins originate from the same DNA, so how can they turn out so different, even in traits that have a significant genetic component? For instance, why might one twin get heart disease at 55 while her sister runs marathons in perfect health? Nature versus nurture has a lot to do with it, but a deeper related answer can be found within something called epigenetics. That's the study of how DNA interacts with the multitude of smaller molecules found within cells, which can activate and deactivate genes. If you think of DNA as a recipe book, those molecules are largely what determine what gets cooked when. They aren't making any conscious choices themselves. Rather, their presence and concentration within cells makes the difference. So how does that work? Genes in DNA are expressed when they're read and transcribed into RNA, which is translated into proteins by structures called ribosomes. And proteins are much of what determines a cell's characteristics and function. Epigenetic changes can boost or interfere with the transcription of specific genes. The most common way interference happens is that DNA, or the proteins it's wrapped around, gets labeled with small chemical tags. The set of all of the chemical tags that are attached to the genome of a given cell is called the epigenome. Some of these, like a methyl group, inhibit gene expression by derailing the cellular transcription machinery or causing the DNA to coil more tightly, making it inaccessible. The gene is still there, but it's silent. Boosting transcription is essentially the opposite. Some chemical tags will unwind the DNA, making it easier to transcribe, which ramps up production of the associated protein. Epigenetic changes can survive cell division, which means that they could affect an organism for its entire life. Sometimes that's a good thing. Epigenetic changes are part of normal development. The cells in an embryo start with one master genome. As the cells divide, some genes are activated and others inhibited. Over time, through this epigenetic reprogramming, some cells develop into heart cells and others into liver cells. Each of the approximately 200 cell types in your body has essentially the same genome, but its own distinct epigenome. The epigenome also mediates a lifelong dialogue between genes and the environment. The chemical tags that turn genes on and off can be influenced by factors including diet, chemical exposure, and medication. The resulting epigenetic changes can eventually lead to disease if, for example, they turn off a gene that makes a tumor-suppressing protein. Environmentally induced epigenetic changes are part of the reason why genetically identical twins can grow up to have very different lives. As twins get older, their epigenomes diverge, affecting the way they age and their susceptibility to disease. Even social experiences can cause epigenetic changes. In one famous experiment, when mother rats weren't attentive enough to their pups, genes in the babies that help them manage stress were methylated and turned off. And it might not stop with that generation. Most epigenetic marks are erased when egg and sperm cells are formed. But now, researchers think that some of those imprints survive, passing those epigenetic traits on to the next generation. Your mother's or your father's experiences as a child or choices as adults could actually shape your own epigenome. But even though epigenetic changes are sticky, they're not necessarily permanent. A balanced lifestyle that includes a healthy diet, exercise, and avoiding exposure to contaminants may, in the long run, create a healthy epigenome. It's an exciting time to be studying this. Scientists are just beginning to understand how epigenetics could explain mechanisms of human development and aging, as well as the origins of cancer, heart disease, mental illness, addiction, and many other conditions. Meanwhile, new genome editing techniques are making it much easier to identify which epigenetic changes really matter for health and disease. Once we understand how our epigenome influences us, we might be able to influence it too.
That's a whole bunch of us here. Welcome back, everyone. Some faces I get to see again. Thank you for coming back, or it didn't scare you away. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Um, so I am Almitra Gasper. It's so good to be back with you all this Monday morning. And for those of you who this is your first session in this series, thank you for being here. The Friday session was awesome. You will hear about it from those of us that were here. As we will do a review first before we get into today's topic of conversation, epigenetics. But before we do that, we're going to make sure that we do some introductions and the like. So again, thank you for being here. It's about 5 minutes after the hour. All right, I played that video in the beginning so that we could just get warmed up. That video deals with a lot of the science of epigenetics, and that's nice. This is understanding violence as a public health issue. So we will deal with the science. But the
Grammarly
conversation
encourages you to
that
write
we will have
confidently.
would be a little different. Over this stuff. So. Good to see some of you all back. Okay, so let me share my screen with the presentation. Feel free to introduce yourselves to the larger group in the chat. Our personal introductions will be in breakout rooms, so you will get a chance to talk to people one-on-one or two and three in the room. But right now, feel free to drop your name. If there's an organization that you're representing, that's awesome. Where you are, that's great. So thanks, iPhone in NYC. And you should put your name in there, too, because I'm pretty sure that your name is not iPhone. And if you're, please let us know if you're not in New York City. I'm always curious as to where people are joining us from all over. Peter Marius, welcome back. Okay, Ms. Eva, I know Ms. Eva is back with us, but happens to be having some issues. Oh, Patria is here. My colleagues from GOHH, welcome, welcome, welcome. And so, again, this particular training is open source training that I grabbed from the Multnomah Health Department, Multnomah County Health Department, and they are in Oregon. It was developed by a whole bunch of people that you see listed here. Specifically, they developed this training for credible messengers, right, to talk to them about the work of becoming community health workers. And so this, I love that, right? That's exactly what I was looking for, and I found it. This training, again, is available online, and so the link for this I'm dropping in the chat. You might have gotten this already in your email, but if you weren't on our list, the registration list, and you did not get that, it's there. I'm dropping them in the chat for you right now. Hey, Keisha. Great, 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 great. And there you go. So feel free to reach out to these persons if this is something that you would like to do. All of the materials are there as far as like the facilitator notes, so that you can lead the training if you wanted to for your team. Okay, so objectives for day 2. So we will take a time to review some of the work that we did on Friday, but today's objectives will be for us to review individual determinants of health. So on Friday we reviewed more social and like group determinants, and today we'll take a moment to look at individual determinants. And then today we're going to get into this conversation around epigenetics. If the word sounds like, oh, I don't know what that is, trust me, by the end of today, it'll be simpler to explain or explain to someone else if that's what you intend on doing. Um, we'll be able to call out some of the impacts of violence on ourselves and the communities that we serve. And then, of course, we're going to spend some time at the end of the session just talking about solutions, right, and methodologies that we're already doing to help us mitigate the impacts of violence, structural violence, and the like. So I am asking that we take a moment to just remind ourselves on what the proper protocol is for these video conferences now that we are in the flow. We might have been very new to this when we did this last year, but now everyone should just know what it is that we're doing. So keep your mic muted unless you are speaking. This is just a bandwidth conservation method, and it keeps the conversation going without a whole bunch of interruptions. Please use the chat. Feel free to use the chat for anything, for asking questions, for answering questions, making comments, introducing yourself. Side conversations, like I'm here for it. Like this entire topic requires a lot of engagement in order for it to be fruitful, in order for us to get something from it. So engage, use the chat to engage. Share the airtime. Some of us are really, really great when it comes to speaking in these spaces, and we have no problem raising our hand, opening our mics, and speaking. I just ask that we recognize that some of us might need a pause or a breather or a moment or two before we get a chance to speak, and so just to make space for others to share the air as well. These sessions tend to cause us to feel compelled to share, sometimes very personal things about ourselves. Hopefully don't come here sharing or gossiping about other people. When we do that, when you hear things that are shared that are very intimate, we ask you to hold on to that, hold on to the very intimate details. And if you do feel compelled to share about what you heard, just share what you learned, share the lesson that you learned. This is a brave space to contend with problems and not people. Even if those people are not present, we really just want to deal with the issues as much as we can. Let's be impeccable with our words. This is something I grabbed right from the 4 agreements with Miguel Ruiz. The guidelines around that, so how do you do that? How do you be impeccable with your words? Speak truth and be kind when speaking the truth, right? Because the truth don't always gotta hurt. Resist the urge to make assumptions and or draw quick conclusions. I mean, in other words, just be curious, ask questions. And speak powerfully. And this is really important for those of us that are taking a moment to speak in this space. This is an opportunity to practice speaking very powerfully from the I, and to avoid generalizations such as, well, you know, most people, and, well, you know, when you, but, okay, so that's nice. And we talk like that all the time. And the invitation here is to speak very powerful from the I, and to get in touch with what it is that is really being expressed about your own personal experience. So before I move from that, what questions do we have on? Is there any dissonance, questions, concerns, any things that you would like to add? If you normally participate in these types of sessions, or you were here on Friday and you say, hey, let's throw this in there too, let's add this. So far, so good. We thumbs up on this? Okay. Thank you for allowing me to set the agreement. Normally, we would do this as a group, and if you are leading this training in the in-person full-day arrangement, please, my encouragement is to create community agreements. Okay, and so we're going to do some welcomes. We've reviewed the agreements. We're going to do a review of Friday's topic of discussion, get into epigenetics, and then get into how we are working with these issues in our neighborhoods and communities. Okay, and so on Friday, we reviewed these approaches, the public health approach, and these main activities for health promotion, for public health, which are health promotion, prevention, harm reduction, and curative care. And so for before we get into that, let's do the introduction. So those of us that were here on Friday, raise your hand if you were here on Friday so we could just see. People can look and see how many people were here. Okay, so it's like, you see like 3, 4. Okay, good. So I'm going to split you up into groups where you're going to get a chance to introduce yourself to each other. For those of us that were here on Friday, when we did this on Friday, you introduced yourself to each other and then you shared your definition of violence, or what, when you think about violence, what comes to mind and how you would define it. And so for the persons that were not here on Friday, we're going to ask you to do that same thing, all right? When you get into the breakout rooms, you give your definition on how it is that you might define violence. So for the persons that were here on Friday, when you get into your breakout rooms, my request is that you share a little bit about what you learned on Friday and or what you remember being discussed. Anything that stood out to you really from the Friday session. So introduce yourselves to each other. Allow the persons that weren't here on Friday to, say what they think violence is or how they would define it. And then for the persons that were here, for you to do a recap, recreate, call out anything it is that stood out to you from Friday's session that you would like to bring in and share in that moment. We are going to do a more thorough review, but this is just to get us started. So any questions about that? Okay. Going. Okay, so there will be roughly about 4 persons per room. And we set the time. Let me see, how much time do we need for this? Okay, we'll do about 5 minutes. In a moment.
So the leader said it in the whole.
Um, were you able to get the link for Robert Charles? Or I'll show you a message. You gotta take yourself off mute. I am not sure if what link he has, but if you can forward him the link that you have, if that's working, I'm not sure. Elsie, are you talking to me?
I believe he's on.
He's
Yes.
on? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't
He
know.
made it. Okay. All right.
Trying to get on. I don't think he finally got in though. Robert? Oh, you're on. Okay.
Morning.
You
He
got
made
the
it. Oh, Rob. Okay, he just made it. Rob is back. Thank you. I don't know why I didn't make Robert Charles and Rob C mean the same thing in my head, but I just got it.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Rob. Okay, is everybody coming back to the breakout room? Okay, welcome back. Excellent. Okay, now we can get into our review. Okay, so now the things have happened here. So, who can help us understand what we're looking at here? Who can give us an example of health promotion or prevention? Start with those two. Where my overachievers at?
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
One of the examples for prevention is therapy. I could say that because one of the things that my group was talking about was self-harm. Self-harm is actual form of violence due to depression. Earlier in my life, I went through depression and I used to self-harm and stuff. And one of the ways that helped me with that was therapy. And I tell people all the time, yeah, it's kind of weird to do therapy and stuff because people type embarrassed because of therapy and stuff. But me, myself, I could say that therapy has helped me in so many ways because one of the things I tell people that all the time, violence is through logic, it's through emotion. So one of the ways to reduce that or to help that is to talk about it. Because a lot of these people, they bottle up so much emotions and they don't know how to let it go or who to talk to. Because there's been situations that people will reach out to someone, and when they talk to someone, they either don't understand them, they feel that they don't understand them, or they feel that they're wasting the time talking to someone, and that makes their anger even more riled up.
Thank you, Damaris. And so what I hear you saying is that therapy, talk therapy, is a form of preventative care.
Yeah.
I agree. And let me just do a quick, just to shout you out, Damaris, for even saying that. How many people in the room support what Damaris said 100%? And you can do that by showing your hands, you can do a heart emoji, right? Because I feel like we keep bringing this up and we're not sure if people are listening. So I just want to give everyone a moment to acknowledge that, yes, girl, yep, at this you might be preaching to the choir here, right? Because and that's what it is now. Thank you. So thank you for getting us started, Damaris. Anyone else? An example of health promotion or curative care or harm reduction that should not be. Hand up because you was agreeing on the therapy. Do you want to give us an example of any of these things here? Anybody? Sharing the space. Don't all jump in at one time. How about harm reduction? So that came up. We talked about that. Friday. Any examples of harm reduction that you would recall, remind us about?
So you're in harm reduction. We have 7 brief challenges here, and what they do is pretty much just talk about reducing the amount of drugs that you may be taking. So it's just talking about it, having the person realize, right? Just depending on where they're at, right? Realize that they have a problem, right? If, harm reduction is just seeing the risks that they may be putting themselves due to this drug, and then having them finally say, okay, I think you're right, I need to reduce it or completely eliminate it. Some people could do it, some people can't, but that's harm reduction.
Thank you, Elsie. Exactly. So just the issue is there, and it's there, so we can't undo the issue. But we are looking to reduce the impact of it or slow down the negative outcomes that might come from it. And so we usually hear about harm reduction, and Elsie talks about it with substance abuse. But sometimes it shows up in our care with our work with persons that are sex workers, right? We offer condoms, right? Or persons that are living with HIV might be offered condoms and PrEP, like so medication that helps to reduce the risk, reduce the harm that might happen as a result of behaviors that people are probably going to do, right? And so harm reduction acknowledges that there's a whole person involved, and the influences or the factors that play into behavior are complicated. And the thing I love about harm reduction is that there's a lot of time spent in education and sharing information about whatever the issue or the concern may be. And so health promotion, as an example, is just simply like stop smoking, or the things that promote the truth campaigns that talk about the cigarettes and the cigarette problem, or who funds it, or the outcomes and all of that. And the curative care is exactly what it sounds like, some sort of prescribed, usually medicinal care after an issue is already present, some sort of disease state or problem. Okay, so that is the review of our public health approach. And then there was like this way or methodology of breaking down a thing, right? And so DDs is just simply define, identify, develop, and then scale. And so we reviewed that a little bit on Friday. This is just a methodology for attacking a problem. We are talking about this in the context of public health, but you might use this exact same methodology for any problem in your personal life, in your work life. Define what the problem is, identify root causes and or risk factors that contribute to the problem, develop and test some sort of strategies to address whatever is going on here, and then find what works, find a formula that works, and scale it up and across, right? Try it out in different areas of your life or different areas of your work. And so this next slide is the loaded one, right? This is where we spent time actually going over and reviewing a whole bunch of things when it comes to violence. We took a lot of what we talked about as far as definition and culminated everything into this opportunity to really break down the different types of violence and why they might be occurring. So that conversation is really robust. And so is there someone here, I don't know how tiny or big this is on your screen, right? But if you can see the World Health Organization definition, can I get someone to read that for us?
The World Health Organization, WHO, defines violence as the international use of physical force or power, threatened or actual against oneself, another person, or against a group of community, which either results or has a high likelihood of insulting an injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. Keep it going. Good?
Yes, excellent. Thank you, sir. Okay, and so can you tell me what you think about that?
Oh, me? Sure. You
Of
want me
course.
to start off some trouble again, huh?
Yes, sir.
Listen, I've been in harm reduction for quite a while, right? So to me, harm reduction is like a Band-Aid. We're not gonna fix the main problem, but we're gonna throw you some Band-Aids. We're gonna send you monies to take care of the community and show that we care, but we're really not gonna get to the root. It's like a Band-Aid from the government. The working girls, there are ways to get girls off the streets, get them a place to stay, house them, find out their real needs, as opposed to giving them some condoms. Now, I'm not saying don't give them condoms because they're going to stay out there. But again, going back to me from Friday's, me being in training for quite a while, they throw us Band-Aids. They don't give us any real solutions, but just Band-Aids. Just here's a bone. We care for you. We care for the community. Don't tell us to fix the schools because we're not going to do that. Don't tell us to clean up the streets because we're not going to do that. So, where does that stand at? Where am I? Psychological harm.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for getting us started. Exactly, right? So I hear exactly everything that you're saying. And thank you for saying it because first of all, there was a lot of head nodding in this space while you were talking, right? So this is why I'm saying thank you for saying it, because a lot of us agree. And a lot of us are in the work, doing this work and agree, which is stressful, right? It's stressful to be doing. It's like, this is not the answer, but this is going to help for the meantime, and it helps me pay my bills. Like, it's a whole mess. And so thank you, Anthony, for bringing that up, because in a way that is definitely what we were talking about as far as the larger part of the iceberg, right? And so there's all these things that we see. We see that sex work and drug abuse is harmful, right? It's problematic. We're not 100% sure what it stems from, right? But there's all these things that we're doing, and we're really busy doing things in an attempt to address it. But if we're not looking at the underlying issues, if we're not looking at the largest chunk of the iceberg, all this stuff that's underwater, which in this picture you can't really see it that well, but we know that is the structural and cultural violence and structural and cultural aspects of the issues that we're dealing with, then what we are doing is essentially putting on Band-Aids, exactly what Anthony said. And so today's discussion attempts to unearth, right, and dig deep and get to more of what might be happening to give us a better understanding. I don't promise that we're going to have a brand new idea today, but I'm saying that we can have a different conversation and potentially spiral a way out that makes sense for us. One of the things that we did land on Friday that I was really hit with was how do we make it different for the next generation. So I think it was Carmen that raised concern about a grandchild. And so my encouragement is that the conversation that we're having today as adults, right, and it might feel like this is a repetitive conversation, we've talked about this before, that's probably true, right, because we're talking to each other, peers, right, and we might get some elders in our lives and talk to them, but I'm not sure that the conversation is happening in the other direction, right, and so the same way didn't get as much conversation from my parents and my grandparents as I feel I needed or wanted around this issue, I want to make sure that we're not repeating that same behavior, right? That we're not doing that thing where we're saying, well, they're 12 or they're 9 and there's time. They don't have to deal with that now, right? Or there's, well, you know, it's not that important. If they just, like we live in a meritocracy, if they just do this and do this and do that, then it's not gonna. So that's a lie. We have, if we're lying to ourselves and we're telling ourselves that, then we are effectively just repeating the cycle of the problem, right? Because the problem persists because this conversation happens amongst so-called adults that were once children and didn't get the conversation from adults. So what are we really doing? How do we really see this? This conversation needs to happen across generations. That's what I'm getting at. And children need to be brought into the conversation as full and whole persons and not be disrespected because of age. Because they still are feeling the things that we are feeling and living with the things that we are living in without a context and a frame. And as a child that lived through that, all it did was make me angry with the adults and think that they were stupid, right? Honestly, because if there's these things that's going on that I see and you're not talking to me about it, then maybe you don't see it, and that means you're not smart, right? And so it's just a simple way of seeing the world as a child. So we have a responsibility. That's why I'm just doing a lot of talking to say that we have a responsibility to have so-called grown-up conversations with so-called children, right? Because our children are co-conspirators in the fight of whatever it is that we are doing. And if they're not empowered properly, if they can't be alongside us and play their role, then we have created another internal problem that we're going to have to deal with, and we are dealing with. That is part of the problem that we're dealing with now. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, ACON. The Needle Exchange Program could be an example of harm reduction. I was just checking back in the chat. Is there any more conversation that we want to have about this defining violence and identifying potential like risk factors or root causes for the violence? Some of you weren't here, didn't get a chance to kind of talk about this stuff. So if there's anyone that wants to put their voice in the conversation now before we move into a little bit more of this, but right, so now we're about to get into these individual determinants. Now, on Friday, we talked about social determinants of health. And we need to talk about the individual stuff because we're going to get back into the larger frame. But I just want to make sure that we cover this. And so we're still identifying like root causes. Why are people shooting each other? Why are people fighting to the death over coins and nickels and pennies? Like, why are people beating their children within death, right? Like, why, right? And so there's a bunch of social reasons, and there are things that are happening very intimately in homes and households that contribute to the cycle. And so the presence of intimate partner violence and or a lack of social support systems in the household and the family of origin usually equals that violent trends and or behaviors are going to persist. Not a guarantee that a person that grew up experiencing abuse or the target of abuse will become an abuser of other people, but they might begin to self-harm, right? Like Damaris brought up and brought into the space. Thank you for that. And so there's all kinds of ways that violence ends up being as an outcome, and there's all kinds of ways that we receive it. And it's not a guarantee that the way that you receive the violence is the way that you're going to enact it. It is a guarantee that if you received it, it's in your body, and you're going to have to do something with it. That is true. And so internalized oppression is some of what the reaction is to the violence, right? It's the cycle of constantly being beat down, impoverished, beat down again, verbally, physically. At some point, we begin to internalize that. Right? And that does lead to self-harm in all kinds of ways of being expressed. It leads to a scarcity mentality, right? Impoverishment straight up leads to a scarcity mentality. If you are in the mindset that there's not enough, then that is how you think about the world. And then in isolation and apathy, so I say apathy all the time when we hear ourselves saying, these people don't care. Pay attention to what we're saying. Right? When we hear ourselves saying, oh, but you know how the people are. they don't care, or we can't get people to show up, or why did people leave the community dirty like this? People just don't care. So that's called apathy, right? Oh, they don't care or indifferent. And apathy is a coping mechanism. Okay, so people didn't just come on the planet apathetic. People cared about something to the point where they felt like, oh my goodness, I'm getting hurt because my care isn't being reciprocated, and my care doesn't seem like anyone else cares. If I keep cleaning this and no one else cleans it, but everyone dirties it, at some point I'm gonna stop caring too. But that's not because I don't care. That's because I have to protect myself from being hurt. So apathy is a coping mechanism. The inability to conjure up tears and heavy emotion every time you hear about someone being shot and or killed is a coping mechanism, right? Because there's only so much that the body can deal with. And so when we hear ourselves saying that, just remind ourselves that people have dealt with a lot. And when we see people in a behavior that it seems like, oh, they don't care, maybe at this moment they don't, but let's not assume that they always felt that way. Other coping mechanisms that are being judged here as poor, but, they are a coping mechanism. So substance abuse, thrill-seeking behavior. So a lot of times this does get judged, right? A person drinking heavily and or using copious amounts of drugs, or having a lot of sex. So those are the things that usually get thrown out, right? But there's other coping mechanisms that I see, like lying to yourself about the reality that you're living in, hopped up for caffeine and sugar all the time, constantly, people work out because they can't think unless they're in movement, right? And so that's why I don't judge, because there's all kinds of ways that we are coping with the structural violence that we are living under. All kinds of ways. Some people pray 1,100 times a day. Like, there are all kinds of ways that we are coping. So I don't have judgments. I'm just recognizing that we're coping because we're all living in the same thing. Okay, so here's some individual determinants. I want to get us into a conversation on the sociology of violence and some of these determinants. But any comments about what you see here about like the individual determinants that might show up and contribute to a person being violent? Okay, now, so let's get into the sociology of this a little bit. So a lot of our discussion with intention, has been about the broader picture. It is to understand violence as a public health issue, we have to understand the whole frame. And so the focus that conversations on violence usually have is usually about bad behavior and bad people, right? It's usually about pointing to individuals and saying, if you look at them and what they're doing is wrong and it's bad and it's violent, and if we fix them, we fix the problem. And so that is the typical conversation that might have happened around violence. This presentation wants to open up the conversation and say, hey, there's way more going on here than just bad actors and bad people. There is something systemic and systematic that's happening, and let's take a look at that. And so in the green boxes on top, there's like education, economics, and policy. That came up in our conversation on Friday. So way before we got to this graphic, we talked about the schools. We talked about the inability for the schools to properly teach our children, whether that's cultural competency, whether that's just lying to people in the curriculum, whether that's the way teachers are interacting with students. So there's all kinds of things that's happening in education that are problematic that we discussed. We talked about impoverishment. We talked about being on the low rung of the socioeconomic status. I think Tyler was the one that raised, just brought up money and how that is this capitalism thing and it's playing a role, and how there might be somebody benefiting from all of this mess. So because there's certain a whole bunch of people that are not benefiting. And then there are policies that I'm going to raise our awareness on that cause a problem. And so here is my version of this graphic with way more detail. Okay, and so when we talk about education, well, what are we talking about? We're talking about very specific things. We're talking about segregation in the schools that never got fixed, so-called fixed. So segregation was a problem. The segregation, teaching people in different places, right? So so-called black people over here, so-called white people over here. That wasn't really what the issue is. The issue was the quality of the education, the quality of the materials that people were able to get, and quality also means the diversity of the materials that people were able to get. So the fix was not to bus black children to white neighborhoods to go to these schools, although they did that. So that's busing, right? And that's still happening. That wasn't the fix, although they did that and they called it integration, but it wasn't. It's more just desegregation. And what didn't happen is that the teachers that were teaching our children didn't get bused, right? And those other students didn't get bused. So there was no integration. There was just desegregation and then more mess. So that's actually what happened. So just telling you that. So when people start saying, oh, integration, you can say, no, integration never happened. But desegregation did happen, right? And the problems that we were experiencing didn't disappear so much, they got worse. So the school to prison pipeline is an idea that many of us recognize, and now we just say that it exists. So there's no actual, like, people are being prepared actually on paper, except that the schools look like prisons and have law enforcement in there doing security and call it safety, and that the test scores are being looked at and determining how many prison beds are being created. So that's pipeline, whether it's actual or not. And then there's this currently what's happening right now, and I am spending a lot of time on education because I feel like we might be able to do some more with that. Right now, there are 44 states in the country that have banned talking about race and racism in public schools. So there are teachers that are literally closing their doors and hoping no one is going to tell on them when they teach about Black history, when they teach about racism, slavery, like the actual thing that created this country to be in existence. Teachers are now being fined and or removed from classrooms and threatened with incarceration, right? So I don't know a teacher yet that has been incarcerated, but that is happening today. So while many of us were scared to death about catching a virus, there were politicians that were petitioning to keep race from being talked about in the schools. I just want to say that, right? Because it didn't stop. So the violence that's happening hasn't stopped. The structural violence hasn't stopped. We know about gentrification. Many times we talk about that. A lot of times now I'm noticing that gentrification is following a redlining trend. So if you didn't know about redlining, you need to know about that. Maybe help you understand gentrification a little bit better. But this country has had economic policies in place for a long time that have advantaged a certain group of people, mainly so-called white people, and disadvantaged another group of people, so-called Black and brown people. Permanent exclusion, eminent domain. So this is just the ways that governments have determined how to monitor and control where people live. That's it. Eminent domain is still happening. There are still highways being built and people's land being taken from them so that a highway can get built. That is not happening. It's not like, oh yeah, that did used to happen. That happened this century, this decade, that is still happening. So when we talk about the sociology of violence, a lot of times there's a tendency to talk about the past and history. Please, because the past and history has informed the present, and we are currently still enacting policies that contribute to violence. And so when we are living with this, we are under stress, an extreme amount of stress. It impacts brain development. It creates what is called toxic stress, chronic stress, which leads to all kinds of medical outcomes, physiological outcomes on our bodies, social coping behaviors like discussed before. And ultimately, the sociology of violence is that all of this stuff in education and economics and this political stuff, like my cousin's going away for a little piece of crack for 20 and 30 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm still tight about that. Like, I really am. Because him and all his brothers, all my cousins, right? And so we just, for 20 years, we was out our boys, our brothers, which became our men, right? And now they home and we all adjusted, right? And so I'm still tight about that, as you can see. I'm doing a lot of talking. This is the sociology of violence. Let me hear your reflections, right? Because we were going to shift from here and get into the epigenetics conversation. This informs us about epigenetics, but let's just take a moment to be with this for a moment. Have you heard about it talked about this way? And can you see the connection?
Can I just add something?
Yes.
I don't think I've heard about it. I've witnessed it. Sometimes when you grow up in it, you don't need to have the conversation. Us as people, middle class people, or, you know, we don't have a conversation. People that live in Black and brown communities, we're not having conversations about like, yo, our schools are bad, but because we know it, we witness it every day. Like, our public school system is the saddest that I've ever seen. I really feel that, you know, there's going to be no more public school systems, and we're going to have to start paying for schools, or all of our kids are going to be in charters or private, because the way the school system is, it's just messed up, from the lack of resources that we have there, the lack of, sometimes in my daughter's school, there's like 2 social workers in a school of kids of 400, 500. How is there 2 social workers? You know, that's what I'm talking about. And you have kids that are walking around with trauma. So it's like, there's no one helping them with that. Or even like our housing system, now they have subsidized housing, but if you really go and look at it, it's not really for us. It's not. So even when like NYCHA developments, that all of us are stuck in NYCHA developments, and then NYCHA is like the worst housing management. I don't think it's, not saying it's the worst, but it's not great. You know, it could be way better, you know, having people without heat in the wintertime or no gas. That's crazy, but it's done purposely. And I think it's done to keep us down and to keep us, again, crime happening and more people being incarcerated, because incarceration is a business. So it's just a nasty cycle. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to hear you this morning, sis.
I just want to say that there are still, the Confederate flag is still being displayed in southern states still. That's all you have to know, that you go down, drive down south, and you don't have to be in Urals. There are, right off the highway, right up 95, not too far down North Carolina, you'll still see the Confederate flag being displayed. That says everything. And our president was against busing. So for those who voted for, and I feel bad I had to vote for that guy, he was against busing Black kids to, you know, good schools. So why did he get Kamala? Because she was against him. He said, let me get this girl to be quiet and let her run with me. So yeah, I mean, look up both of them. And oh boy, I'm getting upset.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Stay with us. Breathe, brother. Get some water. But yes, the conversation is infuriating. Anyone else? I'll take at least 2 more reflections on this graphic. Voices that I haven't heard yet, maybe.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Washington. I'm a credible messenger out of Camden, New Jersey. I'm a recent exoneree. I've been home 2 years. I spent 25
Yes.
years in prison for crimes I didn't commit. I've just been home two
Welcome home.
years, and
Welcome
I
home. Welcome home,
thank y'all,
buddy.
Welcome
thank
Welcome
home.
y'all,
home.
Welcome
thank
home.
you,
Congratulations on the
and
exoneration.
thank you. And the topic you're speaking on with this social violence, and like while I was away, I did a lot of reading and studying, and like these laws are barbaric. Like reading about after slavery, the black code laws, and how they would just lock blacks up for not even for crimes they made up, which weren't crimes. And one of the things that blew my hair back the most was I learned about the underground weathermen. If anyone never heard of them, during the '60s, there was a group that they were against the wars. So they were blowing up federal buildings where they had the everyone's names, who they were putting in, who they were drafting. They were going to draft offices in the federal buildings and blowing them up to blow up the draft cards. And none of them did more than 10 years. They're all home. They just in early 2000 they had a 30th year anniversary. But the Black Panthers, the government put agent provocateurs in there, set them up for crimes they didn't commit, killed some of them, and you still have some of them in jail for crimes they didn't commit. But the weather ground undermen, white people who blew up federal buildings, are on the street. Like it's a real bad problem with race.
Oh man, he was getting too good. Hold on, Sean. All right, I think we lost him for a second. He'll be back. I'll pick up right where he left off. He was getting good, breaking down some things from history, right, and making the connections between what happened then and what happened now. Because what he's describing just sounds like what happened in January, or last year January, with them people running up in the Capitol. So. Is there, while we wait on Sean to come back, I'm sure he'll be back, but is there someone else that wanted to reflect on what you see on the screen here?
You know, I know we hear this all the time. We got to hold our politicians accountable, but we do. We really, I don't know how we get voiced. How do we get voiced? My uncle said that there has to be another revolution. That's the only way. And it's scary, but they talk about taking arms. My mother's a young lord. My mother's an ex-young lord. So we were raised to fight, bear arms. They've taken God out of school, so you can't pray anymore. So now where there's, if you talk about God, you get in trouble,
Yep.
So, and what's funny? If I discipline my child, I'll get in trouble, but a cop will eventually discipline my child. Ain't that something? That's okay.
Yes, and it's okay, exactly. Anthony, thank you. Now I see you got your hand up again. You want to speak again? Oh, you just still had your hand up from last time. Okay. All right. And so thank you for your feedback on this. This is a lot, right? We are going to get into this conversation on epigenetics. I have a video that I'm going to play for it first to just warm us up and to get into that conversation. But I think this now would be a good time for a break. How do we feel about a break right now? Pull this down. Like a 5-minute bio break. That's
Okay.
good to see some. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's do that now. It's 11 o'clock. Perfect. Let's get a break and come back at 11:05.
Dave, what up, man? It's me. Just calling to see, if possible, if you have any time today or within the next couple of days, if you're in the studio or if you're at home or car, whatever, that song that is called Trying or something, Mace was telling me that I needed to hear. He said it was amazing. Whew, the way he was talking, man, I want to hear it.
Am I just another lost in the pack? We horse shack shit, you know, laugh it off. The years just blow by. My eyes stay fixed, but the picture's kinda out of focus. I try a lot, but admit to it. Enjoying life now, but I've been through it. Sometimes I wish that I can go back. No bills, no kids, just getting told back. I want a wife, I love women. How could I front like I don't be in love with them? A little man that I could teach. A little sand, but not the beach. I figure excess, I only bring an excessive amount of fuss. So when I'm gone, make sure the headstone reads, he did it for us. I'm like a modern day Jesus. I cherish warm thoughts like a gray goose. And float soft kisses to my baby. That day's little girl. Yeah, respect her for that. She gon' be somebody instead of somebody, baby mama. You see young minds and now I made an armor. I'm trying to pop a hole in your Yankee cap. Absorb me. The skies over your head ain't safe no more. And hip-hop ain't your home. And if it is, you fucking up the crib, son. You make life look like I don't wanna live one. You might as well hold your breath until you die in the corner somewhere, bent over in the crevice. This God theory overcomes the worst of weathers. As long as you willing to try, you want a good start, homie. You want a good start, so get to trying. People, are you ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Are you really ready?
We wanna be ready.
Ready for the change that may approach you?
Yes.
Follow down the path that you're supposed to.
Yes.
People, are you ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Are you really ready to try? You know mistakes are trials that we learn from. In order to live life, you must earn one. People, are you ready?
Throughout my change to grow, some of my people got left behind. They didn't listen for the gun as I leap from off the line. 13 years deep in this marathon I'm running. Paid dues and still got bills to pay. When I came back around the way, old friends gave me dead eyes and fake smiles half wide. We were supposed to rid the world of danger. These days we not had the small talk like polite strangers. It's natural to fall off, just land close to the tree. I'll be there if they need me to be. And I know all my local shorties, cause they all know who I am and lately wanna flip grammar instead of grams like that's the only choice they got. They tell me how they gonna shake up the game, but came to me to see if I can give them guidance to change. Shit, y'all, I need guidance myself. And I chisel right words to make gems. Got fans around the world, but my girl's not one of them. And my relationship's a big question, cause my career's a clear hindrance to her progression. Said she needs a man and our kids need a father. I'm not at all ready to hear her say don't bother and break. And this I know I can't take, but C. Smith said to hold on. My brother Luck said to hold on. My nigga Dave said to hold on. My nigga Mace said to hold on. Yo, Maceo, we need to hold on. And yo, y'all, we need to hold on. People, are you ready? For what you wanna be? Do you wanna lose hate for love? Do you wanna see these gates above? I said, people, are you ready? But are you willing to try? Do you really wanna carry some weight? Are you ready to design your fate? Yo, people, are you ready?
That's 5 minutes went by real quick.
Sorry about that. My laptop died on me.
Are you good now? It's charged
Yeah,
up?
I'm on my phone, my iPhone. I'm looking for the cord for my laptop, but I also got a Chromebook here and an Android phone, so I'm here.
You got all the tech.
And I'm still learning how to use it. I don't.
Oh, he's still learning how to do it. Okay, good. So he's not.
Well, welcome back, Sean.
Thank you.
Sound like the rest of us. Many of us have multiple tech and like, all right, so how do I use all this actually and get it to work? And then, oh yeah, I got to charge it with the charger. I need an outlet. So it's welcome back. We're coming back from a break now, and we're about to get into the conversation on epigenetics. But I wanted to give you a chance to finish on when you were talking about, comparing those, we call them the weathermen, the underground weathermen.
Underground weathermen, yes.
To which happened
in the 60s.
In the 60s,
70s.
so the same time that the Black Panther Party was happening.
Yes,
and how they were treated differently and dealt with very differently.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you I didn't know that, so thank you for that today, because I feel like I watch a lot of TV, y'all, my bad, it's something I'm working on, but I feel like one of the TV shows I watch alluded to this, like these people that did this blowing up buildings. And it's interesting the way history treats this topic, because now they're heroes. Oh, they're heroes. Yeah, they was against the war and they did it. But no, that's not.
They were domestic terrorists. They were domestic terrorists. I mean, even with the recent events, how when they stormed the Capitol, how they was able to get up in there. If there had been people of another color, it would have been a lot of body bags. It's historical violence against us. It's historical, and their laws, their crack laws versus powder cocaine. I mean, carjacking was just an armed robbery, but so many guys in the Midwest and West Coast was doing it. They made it carjacking and started giving out 25 years.
Right, and they started making it something different. Right.
Yes. And murder has been the same since the beginning of time, since Cain killed Abel. But at one point, you can get 15 years to life for murder. Then it went to 25 to life. Then it went to 30 to life. This is in New Jersey. Now you get life with 85%. You got to do 63 years before you see parole. It's terrible.
Wow.
Jersey is terrible. Jersey is terrible.
Did not know about that.
Yes.
Well, thank you for being here, Sean. We're about to get back into the training, and I'm going to play this video on epigenetics, and then I would love to hear yours and everyone else's thoughts about this video when we come back. Ready?
Yes.
Meet Lucky Lyle and Trouble Tim. Now you might think they look a lot alike. That's because they're identical twins. But imagine them being raised in completely different environments. As adults, they turn out very differently. Lucky Lyle is a model citizen. He goes to work, pays his taxes, treats others well, and gets an education. Trouble Tim is on a different path. He robs banks, doesn't pay taxes, and gets his first prison sentence at the same time as Lyle gets his diploma. Their genes are identical, so it must be their separate environments that have made them so different, right? Well, there's more to it than that, much more. We need to rewind a bit in time. You see, one of the great questions of humanity is, what makes us us? Early explanations had a hint of the supernatural about them. As the centuries whizzed by, science emerged and fought a tough battle to gain credibility. Eventually, social science emerged with the popular theory that our environment is what makes us us. Let's call this nurture. Undaunted, the biological sciences presented another theory: genes, an unchangeable blueprint in you from birth, decides everything. Let's call this one nature. So, are we a product of our genes or of our environment? The battle raged on. Observations in a newer field of study suggest that both are partly right. This field is called epigenetics. It means above genetics and has to do with how nature and nurture interact. At the heart of this discussion is one simple question asked by researcher Michael Meany. What makes a good rat mama? Well, for a rat mother, nothing says love and care like some nice, vigorous licking. The higher the number of licks, the more love and the better the mama. With this in mind, the researchers compared two groups of rat mothers, one that licked their babies a lot and another that didn't. They found that when babies grew up, they carried their mama's behavior with them and passed it on to the next generation and the next one, and so on. But could it simply be that this particular group of rats was genetically predisposed to produce caring mothers? Well, to test this, the researchers took newborn babies from low-licking mothers and fostered them with high-licking mothers and vice versa. It turns out that if the mother is a high licker, the rat baby becomes a high licker too, regardless of whether it's genetically related to her or not. So genes really don't have anything to do with it then? In true scientific fashion, the researchers dove right into the brains of these rats to see what, if anything, was different in the brains of the babies of high-licking versus low-licking mothers. When they looked at genes that possibly play a role in motherly care, they found crucial differences. Newborn rat babies have clusters of molecules called methyl groups attached to these genes. These methyl groups silence the gene, effectively switching it off. The researchers discovered that while the methyl groups in rats from low-licking mothers were still attached, in the rats from high-licking mothers, these methyl groups had disappeared. This was also true for the rats that had been adopted by high-licking rat mothers. The care these rats received from their mothers actually physically altered their genetic expression. Now that's all fine and good for rats, but what about people? Well, the same is true for Lucky Lyle and Troubled Tim, and for you and me. The genes you're born with are the genes you've got. But lifestyle and environmental influences such as nutrition, exercise, smoking, stress, and love greatly affect your biology. These changes can actually be observed at the DNA level. The bright side is that epigenetic changes happen throughout our lives, and our choices can make real differences in how we develop as human beings.
Any thoughts on the video? That is this the first time hearing about this topic, epigenetics? Does it ring bells? Anyone? Back? Questions? Any questions about it?
So I just want to chime in and I want to say I'm really happy that we're talking about this. I just took a human development course, and I think for a long time, especially in like the psychology field, a lot of when it came to like nature versus nurture, a lot of people went with like the nature debate. But when it comes to epigenetics, you know, factors that can influence one's development can range from so many things, from your socioeconomic status, because, you know, human development is multidisciplinary, multicultural, multi-contextual. So you have to consider so many things in one's development, which I think we often don't think about. We don't think about someone's poverty level, their culture, their lifespan, what their life expectancy is, what their biological age is, what their psychological age is, what their social age is. So I'm really happy that we're talking about epigenetics. Thank you for letting me go on that tangent.
Good, thank you, Ashley, for making the connection to human development in your studies. I think that's important, right? How does this translate, or how does this connect with what it is that I know, what it is that I'm studying, and or the work that I'm doing? So we are going to review a definition, our working definition of epigenetics. The video that I played offers an explanation. There was another video that I played at the beginning that talked a lot about the science. In the email that I sent on Friday, there's some links that talk more about this. There's a video from Bruce Lipton that breaks down how he discovered this thing and been working with it for the past 30 or so years. So we're going to break it down a little bit, and then we're going to just really get to the outcomes conversation, because I think we really need to know or understand how all of this stuff applies. And so, proper. Okay. So epigenetics means that there are chemical reactions that act upon each person's genetic code. These reactions either switch on or off based on environmental factors such as unhealthy chemical exposures or experiences of oppression, cause chronic stress, toxic stress. And so this is a very wordy definition to me that just says that what it is that we are exposed to has an impact on our bodies and potentially can turn things off or on at the level of our DNA. And that is super important to pay attention to, because the conversation before they made this discovery was that, well, how you were born is how you are, and nothing changes that. And the reality is that, no, well, we kind of felt like, nah, I don't think so. I think environment plays a role. And then someone went as deep as to look at it under a microscope to say, okay, here's the proof. We didn't need that proof. I'm going to say that right now. We are sentient beings. We know things. So we didn't need anyone to put this under a microscope to prove this to us, but we have that now so that we can use it as the evidence that what it is that we are exposed to on the planet, in the world, in our households, in our neighborhoods, in our environments, in our schools, in our libraries, on the trains, from the people that love us, from the people that don't love us, all of those exposures equal an impact on our bodies, and that impact equals a change in how we express ourselves. So I'm just trying to make it as basic as possible. Now, a lot of times when we talk about this, we talk about it from the frame and the context of negative, right? And so if we're exposed to chronic stress and or toxic stress, is going to turn some things off that we might need in our body and turn some things on that we don't need all the time, right? So if you're stressed out, it creates a different physical, chemical design in the body. But it also works in things that are positive, right? And so if we're exposed to things that are good, if we're constantly being told how awesome we are, then that's what gets turned on, and that is a different impact on the body. So just so that we can talk about it, let's just remind ourselves that it's both negative and positive exposures that are going to have an impact. Want to say something, Sean?
I'm agreeing with you totally 100%, because as a child, I had a beautiful childhood. I was spoiled rotten. I had two of everything. You know, I'm the youngest of a lot of siblings on my mother's side, my stepfather, my biological father, my godmother. So I had it good. So I honestly, generally, wholeheartedly, I love people. I mean, I would give you the shirt off my back. I'm very generous with money and gifts. So, you know, that's part of my genetic makeup in a sense. But after being exposed to prison, I mean, watching the abuse, watching people get cut, stabbed, being assaulted by officers, it changed me. And one time I got assaulted and I was very, very angry. And I was thinking about assaulting him back. And I developed MS. I have multiple sclerosis now. And I wholeheartedly believe I stressed myself into that MS. You know, so I can agree with what you said 100% because I lived it. But you don't really know what it is until someone explains it to you, you know? So this is a beautiful subject and topic, and thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for that testimony, Sean. Oh, it's so great to have you here today. Yep. And so I'm glad that you made the connection to a personal experience, because what I want everyone to get is that you can walk around or walk away today talking about, yeah, we studied epigenetics today. But let me tell you something. I've been knew about that. She just gave us a new word to talk about it. Okay? That's it. So let's go further, right? And so my next slide here talks about the cumulative effects, right? And so the effects are cumulative, meaning that they collect, right? Based on the experience of an individual throughout their lifetime, right? So from cradle to the grave, right? Cradle to the grave. But they are also intergenerational. So research has shown that individuals can demonstrate the effects of traumatic experiences that happen to their grandparents. And these physical effects are potentially passed through multiple generations. And so this is talking about negative stuff, just to remind us that it happens in the positive also. But we do focus on the negative stuff because we are concerned about the changes in DNA, right? And what that means. And so a lot of times people say, "Oh yeah, I got diabetes. It's genetic," and I'll be like, "Yeah, it's actually not genetic, actually." But there's a conversation we can have, right? Because your genes do play a role here, right? Because your genes are predisposed to a thing because of something happened to the people in your life. Now, if you had different behaviors, right? You didn't grow up eating the same way. And you had different environmental exposures, the diabetes may or may not have manifested, right? And that's just how it is. But because you grew up in the same household, eating the same foods, exposed to the same behaviors that manifested the diabetes in a parent or grandparent, then you too are going to manifest those things. If we took you out of that household and put you somewhere else, you had no knowledge of genetics, you had no knowledge of diabetes in your life, you were exposed to people that were healthy and didn't have this issue, you might live a whole life without ever getting that diagnosis, right? And so this is a way for me to help people understand that the things that we have kind of concluded that are genetic actually are not, and we should be careful because we're missing out on the opportunity to break cycles, right? We're missing out on the opportunity to say, yeah, that's what it was until today. That's what it was. Now I know that if I just do a whole bunch of activities on this side, I can actually disrupt and change the programming. Okay? Epigenetics sits on top of the gene, but really what it is code, right? That's when they talk about switching on and off. That's just code, right? And it sounds like we're talking about computers, but the computer was designed after the human body. And so, yeah, we are talking about a computer. We're talking about the body, right? This is super important. The intergenerational aspect of this is really important because it helps us, it can help us to understand things that keep occurring as that we see as patterns, and maybe how do we disrupt that? How do we disrupt that pattern from happening if it's a pattern, a negative pattern? The other thing I want to say is let's not forget about the so-called oppressors, like the persons on the other side of the conversation. So, constant exposure to persons being castrated and hung, constant exposure to people being denigrated and whipped, right? So if you grow up as a child watching your parents talk negatively about people and dehumanizing these people, right? Murdering them publicly by hanging them and then cutting their penises off, right? Like if you see this and then keeping the penis in the jar in your house on the mantle. If you grow up with this, you're going to end up as something and it's going to get passed down. So just want to remind us that we're not talking about epigenetics just for the group of people that's sitting right here. This applies for everyone. So everyone has some level of expression that is a result of the nurturing and the environment that they got. And if that was disrupted, if they were exposed to something different, then maybe we could get a different expression. That's going to give us the potential way out of the mess, right? Maybe, I don't know. So we're going to talk more about this in a second, like the load, like how much this weighs on us. But let's get some feedback if there's a comment, feedback from what you're hearing so far. Okay, and so let's talk about, so when I see this allostatic load and weathering, this is just more language, more words for you to say the thing that you've been saying. So someone read this. The first point, the wear and tear in the body.
I can
The
read
wear
it.
and tear. Oh,
Yeah, who was that? I hadn't heard that voice before.
it's Marcy.
Hey, Marcy, just came back.
Yeah, I'm
So
bouncing.
good.
I don't know. My signal's crazy today. Sorry for coming back.
That's fine. You got your glasses on? You can read this today?
Yes, I can. Yes, I got my
Okay,
glasses
awesome.
on. The wear and tear on the body, which accumulates as an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. It represents the physiological consequences of ongoing exposure to fluctuating or heightened neural or neuroendocrine response that results from repeated or chronic stress.
Okay, so thank you, Marcy. And Sharita, I think I saw you trying to jump in. I'm going to ask you to read the next bullet in a moment, okay?
Okay.
And so the first thing, allostatic load. So when I hear that, the wear and tear on the body, which is human, blah, 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 I'm like, oh, I know what this is. This is, I'm tired. I've heard us say this before. How you doing? Oh, girl, you know what? I'm just tired, right? How's this thing going? How's that? I don't know. It's just, sometimes it's just too much. Right? So we are in a natural expression of this reality in our language all the time. How's that thing going? So you know what? Sometimes I can't take it. Sometimes it's too much. I can't. Tired. Okay? Okay, Sharita, so read that next bullet for us so we can wrap this up.
it says weathering is aging that happens in the same pattern as other groups, but at a faster pace as a result of chronic toxic stress and exposure to systemic oppression such as racism, white supremacy, and patriarchy.
Excellent. Thank you. Good to hear your voice. So when Ashley was talking about psychological age, physical age, biological age, like this is part of that, right? Do you know that your heart could be at a different age than the rest of your body? Right? Did you know that? Like the rest of you has however many years you've been on the planet, but your heart could be like, it feels like I've been here for 10, 20 years longer than the rest of you. So when I read this, I hear the elders and my peers, quite frankly, saying things like, girl, I'm tired. And I'm sick and tired, right? That's what I hear. And I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So that's the weathering, right? And so if you want to break this down in an easy way to understand this, the epigenetics and the load that comes from the constant exposure to negative stresses or negative influences toxic stress. He ends up as I'm sick and tired, and I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So for me, this is not new. This is just a different way of looking at it and understanding it. When we say that we have to, trauma gets in our bodies, we got to do things like work out. Yes, there's a aspect of working out that helps us to maintain ideal weight. But really, the working out is to help with mental and emotional, right, and other things that are happening, somatic experiences in the body. So let me get some feedback before we talk more about the concrete, like actually how it shows up. But what do you think about this? Everybody with me so far? Anything that's like, that does not make any sense to me, I'll make sure to give you like.
I'll say something.
Yes.
Is that all right? So this kind of, and I could be totally off, but I have a twin sister, right? And her life is very different from mine. She's, married for, I don't know, 18 years. Her and her husband, does really well financially. They don't live in the city. And I'm married also, but my husband's incarcerated. And so I noticed in our aging process, and we're twins, but her and I talk about it often, where I'm like, oh yeah, and I've aged more than you have, right? And I can see it. And like, as far as, like nutrition, we're pretty much the same. I think that the stressors for me are a little more intense and ongoing, because I'm definitely fighting for my husband to come home, and I have been fighting for years now, and I'll keep on fighting because he's coming home. But to put that to the side, I do see the differences. I see the difference in our aging. I see the difference in our stress levels. So for me, this kind of hits home if I'm getting this right. That's how I'm affected, and I see the differences.
Yes, Elsie, thank you for sharing that, because you.
Well, that's Eva. Just Eva's with me.
Oh yeah, that's Edna.
Eva.
Eva. Thank you, because it's so the personal stories is what helps us understand. This is what helps us understand. Exactly. And I'm glad that you are able to see it, so that it's now, hopefully, with this knowledge, if there's anything that you want to get interrupted, you feel powerful, like this, with the new knowledge around this, right? Someone else that wanted to chime in? Edwin, did I see you open your mic?
Yes, I'll chime in. Sean Washington again. What you're saying is like very plausible. Like I witnessed this. It was while I was incarcerated. It was this young gentleman from the Caribbean, Jamaica, St. Croix, and he was in his late 20s. And in like 6-7 years, he had like 3 or 4 heart attacks, and the doctors couldn't understand why he was so young having heart attacks. And I'm thinking about it. Maybe his body was older, his heart may have been older than his body, may have been a stress factor, but because he kept having these heart attacks, like 3 or 4 within like 7 years, he ended up getting medical clemency because they didn't think he was going to make it.
Right.
Now, he's out now. Now we keep in touch. He's out here thriving. Doing real well. So like that environment might have caused his ailments, or maybe his heart may have been older, but he's doing better now. He's definitely doing better now. So this is very relevant. Like I said, I can relate, and I witnessed some of this. Didn't understand what was going on, but this is giving definitions to and understanding to what I've seen. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Glad to hear that, Sean, and thank you for sharing that story. Definitely I've heard so many stories about the impact of that chronic stress on the body. And so in this country, Black and brown women are at a higher risk of having their babies prematurely. And when they break it down, they do the studies, why is that? They say, oh, it's because it's the level of money that they make. Oh, it's because of the prenatal care. Oh, it's because blah, blah, blah. They did a study and compared across all of those things, and still, when everything is the same, it's still Black and brown women at a higher risk of premature birth. And the only factor that they can't rule out is racism, right? And so that is it. That's the reason. That's what's happening, right? And then they tested it out and it was like, okay, well, what about women that weren't born here? So women that had their first 2 babies on the continent of Africa came to around, with care from all their own people, came to this country, maybe was having baby number 3 or 4, and the same problems that regular African American people are having, she was having the same problem, right? So it's environment, right? That's what it is. So there's books, but there's a lot of literature about this. There's a book that "Because the Body Keeps Count" that talks about exactly that, how the body will keep this information that is collected over the years, and it ends up as some sort of outcome. And so in my work, I work at the health department, where I'm always paying attention to these outcomes here. But then there are other outcomes that many of the programs that I service, we're interested in gun violence, right, as a negative outcome. But these are all epigenetic outcomes of exposure to violence. So low birth rate, prematurity, like I just said. Who would have thought diabetes, hypertension, cancer, and obesity are all epigenetic outcomes from exposure to violence? But the reality is that the constant exposure to violence creates chronic stress, and it creates an immune system that is very poor and will lead to chronic conditions in the body, right? If the body is unable to process the trauma, has too much cortisol in the system, because it's stressed out all the time, it thinks it needs to fight all the time, it's always on guard. At some point, the body's not designed to be that way. And so at some point, other things are going to manifest. This is important because many of us might be dealing with these issues right now and are on some medication, might have changed our diet, and still are not understanding why we can't get rid of the problem or get it under control. And a lot of times, psychological trauma, unprocessed, that needs to be addressed, that will help us with the medical outcome and or condition that it is that we're dealing with. So any other things that you want to know based on the conversation, there's some other things that we can add to this list, right? So based on Sean's story, he was like, well, my MS, I'm positive I created it as a result, a reaction to an extreme intense stress state in the body, right? And there's probably some doctors out there, Sean, that will back you up and agree with you, right? Eva talked about aging, right? And the experience of things occurring differently between her and a twin sister. And they're living very different lifestyles, right? And so that is another outcome that could be added to this list. Are there any other outcomes that you think of or have experienced, witnessed in your life that you think could be added to this list?
I'm just curious, as we're having a conversation, like how does working with certain populations, specifically, people, I shared that I work in HIV prevention, STD prevention, which deals with other chronic illnesses as well for those who aren't taking care of themselves. And then I work with recidivated populations. I work with returning home citizens who have, like Sean, who have all that trauma. How does that, like, I never even weighed in. I always think about my personal stresses with my family and all that, but I really never weighed in to where all these external sort of internal things create my chronic stress too.
Mhm. And so it definitely weighs in. I'm going to respond, but not because I have the answer, but I'm going to give you a response, right? There's such a thing called vicarious trauma, right? There's also vicarious goodness too. I vicariously live good stuff through people all the time. So, but there's vicarious trauma where you, because you are a sentient being, and I'm pretty sure there's a level of empathy that you walk with, considering the job that you've chosen to do. So there's a real impact, right, when people are going through something, right? And so the diagnosis is not what they're going through, it's the life stuff that they're going through, that the changes that they're going through, and the helplessness that you might be experiencing, and then your job more than likely requires you to quiet some of the helplessness that creeps up in you to be strong for them, right? And so there is internal conflict that might be happening if there are historical things in your life that might be getting triggered through your work. So there's trauma that's being reanimated that might be unprocessed, that might need to be addressed. And it could just be taking on the responsibility of being fully present for people that are experiencing trauma and pain. Not even specific instances, just that in itself, taking it on, without some sort of regular way to discharge that, right? And so we're not doing a regular checkout every day in some way that helps us to let that go and put that down, or if our self-care regimen and habits doesn't keep up with the amount of exposure and trauma that we are dealing with, we might experience some imbalances. And so the simple thing I would say to you, Ms. Walton, is that you are a whole person, and whether you are at work or with your family, that's you there. The you, the beautiful you that everybody loves and appreciates, that have answers and questions and all of that, that's you, whether you are at work or you with your family. And so wherever you show up, you might be experiencing something and collecting something. And so it's valid to process all of it, right? And not to look and attempt to make it separate and attempt to view it as separate, because it's really not. It's all happening in your body.
Right.
I'm glad you said that.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you said that, because I think I've never been so tired at work since the last 6 months working in this field, because I think I've been taking my work home emotionally. There are some kids that are really making an impact in my life, because one, I identify, and two, there's a solution and they don't see it, and it's hard to, I can give them but so much, and being an incredible messenger, they give you a standard on how you deal with being a mentor, right? As opposed to just whipping their ass, you know what I'm saying? Because that's how I change, that's how I change, I gotta go whipping my ass, and I said, all right, it's time to change. But yeah, I noticed that I've been taking my work home. There was a kid that isn't even in my caseload that has affected me, and he's I think living from place to place, and it's affected me. I noticed it's affected me. And you talk about stress, man, take the subway. I take the subway. I have to get into prison mode, like I'm bidding, like I'm going to jail. Yeah, I played a corner. I got my mace ready to pull out. What's up? It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's a whole thing. It's just like, let me get myself ready. Let me make sure that let me just. And that's
I
just
take the
to
5
go
train.
to work.
Yep.
That's just to go to work.
Yeah.
And so while I got you on talking, Anthony, can you read this slide for us?
Wait, I just wanted to say
Oh,
something.
wait, you put yourself on mute. Okay, so wait. So Eva's going to say something and then
It's just real quick.
Right.
Anthony just reminded me of something, and we were just talking about this the other day. You know, when you go on vacation, which I don't do often, but you know, when you go on vacation and you leave the city, the minute I get off of the plane, it's back on. Like it just automatic, like, okay, I'm home, like I need to put on my face and deal with it. Like that, I don't know if it happens to anybody else, but it happens to me every time I come back to New York.
If you can make it here, you can make it everywhere.
Every trip. Every trip. Okay, Anthony, now read the slide.
60,000 lives are lost due to violence every year.
So that's every year. All right. Let me get Eva. Can you read this one for us?
Sure, 450 billion spent on violence-related injuries.
Okay, so that's some of the numbers on the situation. A whole bunch of people die because of violence. And then somebody is making a lot of money, right? So Tyler had brought this up on Friday. And so here's the evidence of that right now. There's so much money being spent based on violence-related injuries, right? So this is, I would love to compare this to like, oh, okay, so accidents, you know, car accidents and other things, and it doesn't compare though, probably. This is a lot being spent. And then there's just all of us that are being exposed to trauma, right? And experiencing the effects of trauma ongoing. And so there's a study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or the ACEs study. It also talks about exposure to a set of negative life events that exposure to them increases your chances of negative health outcomes in the future. So I can send links on this. This is not what's covered in this training, but it is super important, and it's the same conversation. When I learned about ACEs from my supervisor at the Department of Health, who learned about it in her course of studies in social work, out of like 10, so the ACE score is the highest it could be is like 10 or something like that. And if you have an ACE score of 4 or higher, then you are at a higher risk for a whole bunch of things. The minute I looked at it, I was like, oh boy, I need to get serious about my health, because my ACE score is off the chain. I'm like a 7, right? It's like all the things that could have happened wrong in childhood, they happened, right? And so now, what am I going to do about my health, right? I was like, what about my health? And then I was like, wait a minute. I have children. Oh my goodness. What ACEs have I already exposed them to? Like I needed a week to really get my life to understand, like, oh, I got to take this seriously. I can't just be out here living life and not thinking I'm not being impacted or that I'm not impacting people. And there's a real outcome. And I want to live a long time. Like, I want to play with my grandchildren. Like, there's a whole life I want to live. And so let me get myself together around this. Because the trauma will continue if I don't interrupt it. Okay, so we're going to see how much time we have.
Let me show you. Depending on what kind of camera you have, you can wirelessly connect your camera to the Crane M2.
So what I want to do with this last part of the training is get us to talk, right? I'll be doing a lot of talking, and everyone. There are all kinds of ways that we address these issues. There's all kinds of ways that we have already been showing up for ourselves in community. And so we're not here to recreate anything, right? We're not here to do nothing new. What we're here to do is acknowledge what we're doing and maybe figure out ways to do it better. But it really requires us to ask some questions. And so when it comes to health promotion, the questions that we're asking ourselves are, okay, what are we doing to enable our communities to control over violence and improve our health, right, at the community level? So yes, there's a lot of conversation about elected officials and persons like that, and we can get there. I'm thinking that we create those people. right? So we start as children and we create them, and when they get old enough, we put them in office. Because during the time of childhood, we addressed with them and answered the questions here. How are we making the peaceable choice the easy choice, right? And so these are questions. There are things that people are doing right now that answer these questions. So Cure Violence Communities, they are doing all kinds of work with persons in the neighborhood that are at risk of shooting someone or getting shot, and helping them see different ways of resolving their conflicts and ultimately reaching for the peaceable choice. Simple, right? Not as super complicated and I got to go through a whole bunch of hoops, but just, yeah, that's what we do. We just peace over here. There are some other questions here. What actions are we taking to prevent the problem of structural violence? We are doing it on some level. Some of us are doing it, right? So I homeschool my children. That's my contribution, right? And then like the harm reduction and curative care. So what does the community do to reduce the impact of structural violence? This is an interesting question. We actually do a lot. One of the things, so an example, well, the Black Panthers came up. They are an example, right? And so the impact of structural violence equals impoverished communities and children that didn't eat breakfast. And so they fixed that, right? And then what sort of remedies or solutions can we propose for community violence? And so here are a whole bunch of questions. I would love to hear about the work that any of us are doing to mitigate the impacts of violence, structural violence, and to make our communities safer and feel better. Got a whole bunch of y'all out here that's doing that work. This is the time to brag. Talk about literally, we have an organization that calls themselves BRAG, Bronx Riders Against Gun Violence, but BRAG is not here to brag right now. Okay, Tyler, I see you.
Oh, so sorry. I don't know what I did there.
Good morning. Good morning. Once again, grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this. Here's so much informative information, so many. The question being is like, when you talk about, I go back to the iceberg. You see the tip of it. The bottom of it was like the strongest part of the iceberg. It's hidden. And I was just thinking, you just got to go to the root of the problem. What's causing the stress? What's causing the violence? It's all, and it's structural. And if the structure isn't going to change, then the outcome is, like you say, like to allude back to Anthony's conversation of 20 years ago. If you talk to somebody older, they're probably like 40 years ago, they was talking about this. In the future, they'll still be talking about this. And I look at like the voters registration, especially down in Georgia, how they changing it. And all the work that you put in to make a difference, it's like they're gonna change it. They're gonna do something to, okay, we see they're making progress here, so let's change it again. So it just like disrupts everything that you've been trying to build and all the efforts where you're trying to make that change. It's everybody has their own opinion. Me, I feel like we need to be separated because someone is gonna always, I feel like this Caucasian is gonna always feel like they're the superior. You look at like the United Nations, the countries that had a veto power. There's nobody that represents us has the veto power. You think about the Constitution, there were no blacks and Latinos that they wasn't factored into the equation of the Constitution. It was all about, as they call it, white supremacy. This is going to continue until, like I say, Anthony touched on a point that I think it said his grandparents or somebody said, uncles, that they got to have a revolution for change. And this one of my favorite quotes in the Bible is Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter. God said there's a time for peace and there's a time for war. And you know, you just like, you keep going through it over and over and over. You talk, I remember, you know, so many people, like our people, they're not gonna say anything because they feel like they got job security. They don't wanna do anything to upset the master. But overall, look at how our people are suffering. And you're like, how, unless you're gonna eradicate the root of the problem, then I feel like our efforts are in vain. We may be able to impact a small percentage, but overall, where the true change needs to happen, you have to eradicate the problem. So you have to, they trying to destroy us. So it's just simple, it's like you said, violence. To me, is something that's unperpetrated towards someone else, that unprovoked action against someone that didn't deserve it. They doing it to us, so an eye for an eye. God bless. Thank you.
Boy, I can hang out with him, man. Ooh, I can hang out with him.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you for that. It's important. I want to hear what you have to say, Anthony, if you wanted to make a comment. I just wanted to thank you, Tyler, for coming back and saying that, because there is, I agree with a lot of what you're saying about the problem is going to persist. And we are under attack, so that I concur. And for me, I'm like, all right, so how do we undo this? I'm pretty sure I know I can't do it by myself, so I got to be talking to people. And my elders reminded me some time ago that the revolutions that we're talking about, the rebellions that we're talking about, it happens from children, or who we call children, teenagers, right? And so I'm want to say again that they are our co-conspirators, and if we don't have young people in our lives that we're having these conversations with, then we might be contributing to the same cycle of violence, right? Because we're waking them up. So, Anthony, you wanted to say something, and maybe one other person before we close out?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. So I saw your hand up, Ashley. If there's anyone else that wants to talk about solutions, things that they're doing in their neighborhood, in their work, to answer some of these questions, right? Combat the problem that we're dealing with. Hey, Ashley.
Hi. Yes, absolutely. So I just want to talk a little bit about the work that I do. It's just one fraction of the, systemic change that we need from all angles. But I work for an organization called Freedom Agenda. We are the organization leading the fight right now to close Rikers Island. We are a member-led project. All of our members are directly incarcerated individuals and directly impacted individuals. And we are dedicated to organizing people and communities directly impacted by incarceration to achieve decarceration in our city, especially because we have one of the most costly and most deadly jail systems that is not causing anyone rehabilitation or healing at all. It's just a punitive system. And so through decarceration and system transformation, we can, reallocate funds and put those funds back into communities that have been most harmed by mass incarceration. And we know that true safety doesn't come from the communities that have the most police presence. It comes from the communities that have the most resources. And that's what we're really fighting for. So to divest, redistribute, and defend the rights of incarcerated people. So, if anyone wants to get involved, learn how we're organizing, we need voices, we need people to testify, hold people accountable, write op-eds, talk about your experiences. Just reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, and I'd love to connect with anyone who, aligns with what we're doing over at Freedom Agenda. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley, for sharing that and for being with us today. And so I just really want to acknowledge everyone for participating, however you participated. These conversations so we have them a lot, all right? So don't want to act like we don't have the conversations. We have them a lot. They're not always easy to have, and I don't always feel like they land in a place where people say, okay, that was a good conversation because we got here. And so I want us to encourage everyone to continue the conversation, right? This conversation is not complete. The issue is not solved. This conversation is an attempt, and hopefully we got an opportunity to get a little bit more understanding, or at least some language around what might be going on here. There was no intention to teach anything new. My personal opinion is that this is all stuff that we know already. We just might need to have a conversation about it that helps us think about it differently. If there's anything that you got today that you feel that you can share with a teenager, a young person in your life today, please do that, right? Please start to engage and make it so that the disconnection that ends up happening generationally later is just we can interrupt that. It doesn't have to be a disconnection. When I hear Tyler talk about separate, I got a whole bunch of people that's like separate in my life. So when I hear you say that, I'm like, you sound like my folks. I'm like, all right, but are you talking to the babies, right? Because I still need the behavior of talking to the babies to happen. Because if we get to separate, then we start doing the same mess. We just go find ourselves in the same situation, just recreating it differently. So thank you for your time and your energy today. Thank you for the work that you're doing in community to take care of people. I hope everyone took care of themselves this weekend in preparation for the week ahead, because I'm sure that you got things and obligations and people that expect you to do something awesome for them, whether that's at work or at home. Because that's usually the type of people that show up to these conversations are those people that in our lives that everyone relies and depends on us. So thank you for you all. Okay, yeah, let me put my information in the chat. So again, my name is Almisha Gasper. I work at the health department. I coordinate services for the Strong Messenger Project for credible messengers all over the city to get the therapeutic support that they deserve, because they are out here talking to the children, our youth, and sometimes not so young people around shooting people or making the choice not to shoot each other. So we just make sure that they get the services that they deserve. This is work that I'm highly passionate about. I have teenage boys myself that are not doing some of the stuff I was doing as teenagers at their age. So I am very happy to have already broken a cycle. I'm like, oh, you don't know none of that. Oh, this is good. I did something different. Yes. So as in my style, I like to play music. That's my healing. I got a RZA video that I'm gonna play to take us out. But this training is complete. It's after 12, and so if it's time for you to go, I got that. So thank you, Tanisha. Is there anyone else before I go? Let me not be the person with the last word. Is there anyone else that wants to say anything?
I just wanted to piggyback off of what you said, to briefly say my testimony. I was raised in a domestic violence home. I was in foster care. I have 2 mentally ill people in my mother and my brother. My father died of AIDS. I could go on, but anyway, all that to say that I wanted a change for my children, and they're all A students. They all do fantastic. They were raised in the public system, but I knew I had to change something, right? And that it couldn't be the same thing that I was, exposed to. So I thank God for that, because only God gave me the strength for that. So thank you. I love this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so what am I playing? I'm playing a music video. If you want to stay and watch it, but you can just pause it on YouTube. I'll be showing my age every time I play these videos. So you can see that I'm a Wu-Tang head also. local visit guy at this point, looking like an old man.
The fate of the world is in your hand. Is in your hand. The fate of the world is in your hand. All praises due to Allah. Right. Respect to all my Christian brothers out there. All my synagogue brothers. Right. All my Hare Krishnas. Right. Let's build together. Let's go. Let's get them. Let's bring some light to it. Put your hands up. Wu-Tang is forever. 1,000 years of darkness. The world got struck with sorrow. Hallowed be thy name. We need a better tomorrow. Rejuvenate the blood through tendons and the bone marrow. Light always shine. We just trapped inside the earth's shadow. The sky is God's eye. The sun, the pupil, yes. The wise recognize a fool is unscrupulous. A coward dies 1,000 deaths. A liar lose 1,000 breaths. We learn to breathe right until the last breath is left. So what's left besides for us to do what's right? They breathe mythology. Social consciousness not being taught in sociology. But sexuality being taught in today's biology. Your psychic powers being dumbed down by psychology. Despotism, capitalism, socialism. Forgot the wisdom, now we sitting in a rotten system. The fate of the world is in your hands. Come on. Left, right, come together. Put your hands together. Wu-Tang is forever. The fate of the world is in your hands. Let's go together. Left, right, come together. Put your hands up. Wu-Tang is forever. Who could turn back the hands of time? True life is an eternal bliss. The soul Christian knows eternally. Then revealed in an external bliss. Every sense is stimulated when the lips touch in a gentle kiss. Every impossibility is expressed every day in our children's wish. Yet possibilities overcome what the impossible consists. Persistence overcome resistance, so don't resist. The God is most merciful and most merciless. Should be most wise to memorize a verse like this. Ruler zigzag, zigzag, risk his life for you. In the spiritual world, Wu-Tang Clan had to fight for you. And we're victorious. Allah is the most high, the most glorious. So it's time to stand up. Come together, righteous warriors. The fate of the world is in your hands. Come on. Everybody. It's in your hands. Follow me, look. Left, right of the world. Come together. Right, come together. Left, right, come together. Put your hands up. Wu-Tang is forever. Left, right, come together. Left, right, come together. Left, right, come together. Put your hands up. Wu-Tang is forever. The fate of the world is in your hands. It's in your hands.
So you can see, I still use hip hop. I still use hip hop all day. So.
Old school, good music.
Yeah. So everyone have a great Monday and a great week. Have a good Holy Week. We in all the Passover, Lent, Ramadan. We in all of it. So get your prayer on. Okay.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right, peace, stay.
Everyone have a good day. Thank y'all.
God bless.
Bye.
Peace.